I'm Julia, and welcome back to NB Library. So you can see we're filming in a bit of a different spot today, and I'm also going to make this one quick because I turned the AC off so that I can film this, and it is 79 degrees in my room. Going through a little bit of a heat wave here in the Seattle area. And speaking of the Seattle area, this video is going to be about me working on the squares of my summer book bingo board. I've hung it on the back of my door like that one Arthur episode, PBS kids know. King County Library System and the Seattle Public Library System team up every summer along with Seattle Arts and Lectures to put on book bingo. This is an adult summer reading program. There's also a version for teens. I assume that they do something for kids, but I'm actually not sure what that is since I don't have any reading kids in my life. I didn't want to take it off the door, but I'm going to do it real quick just so you can see. So I keep this on the back of my door, and I've been writing in my books that I've read, and then I also have a version on my computer that has the covers, and then I keep track of my TBR and such. So this is the, I think, third year in a row that I've done this, and last year, if you finish the bingo and enter in a drawing, you might win something, and last year I won a tote bag that had the bingo on it. Let me get that for you, actually. It is so much cooler in the other room where the AC is going. The things I do for you. So this is the tote bag. I'm using it this summer since it's a summer tote, but I have so many tote bags I have to cycle them out. And out in public, people have recognized this and gone, is that the summer book bingo? So that makes me feel good. It runs from about May to September. I'll link down below so you can get more details. Whether or not you're in the Seattle area, feel free to follow along. I think they always have great prompts. For this video, I have a few books on my TBR that I know I'm going to be reading, and then a few others that I might sprinkle in. I'm kind of leaving it up to my personal choice. But for the eye-opener square, I'm going to be reading A Black Queer History of the United States by Riley C. Snorton and Darius Bost. This came out earlier this year, so it had been on my radar on kind of like the slate of new releases. And it's one of those like under 200 page books. Like books like these, especially with such an interesting topic, I always want them to be longer, especially in hardcover. I just feel like I want it to be at least over 200 pages, you know. I'm sure that with this book, and if you're tracing 400 years of Black queer history, or near about, a lot of that is going to be that we're not going to have a lot of information on. I've noticed this with other, like, Black history. It can sometimes be tough to get concrete information about people. So I'm sure that that was a issue in researching this book. It's got 2 parts and 6 chapters. I don't know exactly who's going to be covered in this. I assume people like James Baldwin and Bayard Rustin, but I'm also hoping that they cover the first drag queens, because I know that post the Civil War and in like the outskirts of Washington, D.C., drag was kind of like invented by a queer Black man, and there was going to be a book coming out about it, and I think that just may not end up happening. Like, I can't find any information about it after the like initial press releases about it getting published. So I'm hoping that they cover that because I'm really interested in that topic, and there's just like not a lot of information for lay people out there that don't have access to like research accounts and stuff like that. But I chose this for eye-opening because while I like learning about Black queer history, I'm sure there's going to be tons in this book that I haven't heard of, and I'm always looking to be like challenged and taught by books like this. For the history square, I'm reading My Government Means to Kill Me by Rashid Newson. This is an account of a young Black teen during the AIDS crisis in New York City, and I think he like meets Bayard Rustin, so I'll be 2 for 2 for Bayard Rustin cameos in a fiction book this year. He's also in These Heathens by Mia Mackenzie. It's so hot in here, guys. Still 79, but man. I just read Rashid Newson's newest book, There's Only One Sin in Hollywood, and I was a little bit disappointed by it, and I think I kind of went in with certain expectations of how the plot was going to go. So I don't have a lot of expectations with this one, and maybe that will help temper like what my rating is going to be. Some of the other books that I might read are, I just got this book in Portland, New Sons 2, which is an anthology edited by Nisi Shawl, who is a local to me, non-binary Black author. And then The Possibility of Tenderness by Jason Allen Passaint, and that's going to be for the Soothing Square. Oh, and if I didn't mention it, New Sons 2 would be for the PNW, Black, Indigenous, or POC author square. I have a whole TBR for this bingo. You best believe that I made that a while ago, but these are kind of the ones that I'm most excited about reading that you might see me reading in this video. Okay, video's wrapping up and the AC is coming back on. I'm here at the library. I'm gonna return some books and just grab some books for various videos and reading challenges I'm doing, and my TBR for July is not super set in stone yet. I want it to be a bit more like loose and mood ready, so let's go inside and see what they got. Here at the park to hang out, read outside, maybe do some writing. My roommate got married here, actually. She's divorced now. Be something. I feel myself letting go of what holds me back, 'cause I know we could be something. I'm at my roommate's parents' farm for the weekend. This is their craft room, and I like to come in here because they have a standing desk, which I have adjusted to at this point, and I can't sit down for long periods of time. And I'm about halfway through A Black Queer History of the United States. This is simultaneously like a theory book, which I got used to reading in college, and pretty readable. Like, it hasn't taken me all that long to get halfway through this, and the calculation that I kind of did when I bought this hardcover copy is that although the content is less than 200 pages, and then you get to the notes and back matter, the information presented is pretty dense, and the lines and font are pretty like small and close together. So I consider that to be a worthy purchase, because sometimes I'll buy like a young adult book and there are half as many words on the page. This is certainly a worthy book for the eye-opening square for the book bingo. I do have some problems with it, as I do with theory, and that's more of a me issue. I started to notice something about the sentence structure that has bothered me in theory, and now that I've noticed it, I can't stop noticing it. To get the point across, the authors will have a sentence where, let's see if I can find a good example of it. Basically, it's that there are like little mini lists inside a sentence. So they can't just say like, dominant culture cast Black people as incompatible with white gender ideals. There have to be a bunch of ands in there where like they are trying to cram as much information into a sentence as possible. And again, this is not unique to this book, but the sentence that I just read was a simplified version of the actual sentence, which is, scientific racism, the law, and dominant culture cast Black people, free or enslaved, as incompatible with white gender and sexual ideals. Now, a lot is coming across in that sentence, and there are a lot of like, I don't know what to call them, not caveats, but like, you have to say Black people, free or enslaved, and white gender and sexual ideals. And I don't think that that kind of sentence is wrong on its own, but I start to notice that nearly every single sentence in this book is structured like that, where they are trying to get across as much theory as possible in one sentence. And it's not that they are like purposefully trying to use big words to sound smart, because I've noticed that When I'm looking for a word, I will sometimes reach to the most like complicated version of the word because it's at the top of my mind. And I imagine that when you're writing and reading a lot of theory, the most complicated word or concept is going to be what you reach for first in writing. And so I don't think that the writing should be dumbed down by any means, but sometimes it feels like they are using the most complicated language they can. But at the same time, like, it's not dense and inaccessible. I think that the way that the information is organized is good. It's grouped by points that they're trying to make, but also fairly linear in the information that's being presented. I think that there are some claims in here that are not backed up, or some examples where I'm like, why did you use that as an example? I want you to go a little bit deeper in that. Like, it's talking about how the stereotype of the black welfare queen in the 80s was used as a reason to end some welfare and social services, and that there was this scare about black women who were single and had a lot of kids and were scamming the system to get a bunch of financial support. And Reagan used this in his campaign against the welfare system. And they keep talking about how the stereotype of the welfare queen and the fear of black sexual deviancy fed into, racism and all of that. But they just kept saying, like, the sexuality of black single women, but I wanted them to explain a little bit more why they were choosing that. Like, I wanted them to talk about, like, were these black women seen as lesbian? Were there black lesbian women on welfare? Like, I'm sure there were, or do you have examples of them? And it feels a little bit like, and this is probably more of an issue of what's in the archive and what's recorded than the author's intention, but it feels a little bit like they dwell more on men and male examples than they do on women in this book. Although I did learn about, like, honestly, a new hero of mine named Polly Murray, who we don't know how they would choose to identify nowadays, but they were assigned female at birth, who tried to pursue female to male transition when they were young in the 40s, were unsuccessful, and then kind of gave up because they weren't able to. And so the authors choose to use they, them pronouns, which is why I'm using them. And Polly was involved in lots of activism, particularly like communist labor activism, and then became an Episcopalian, not pastor, I'm not sure what the word is in the Episcopal Church, but then I looked them up and they're an Episcopal saint, which is so cool. And this book is also talking a lot about how the mainstream black civil rights movement, because they were so focused on appearing like good and normal middle American to assimilate into and be accepted by the white mainstream, they kind of abandoned more marginalized people within the movement, such as queer or poor people. And they talk about, the authors talk about this term called the racial closet, wherein in order to protect kind of the rest of the movement, certain people like Bayard Rustin had to downplay their sexuality or take a step back from civil rights movements because their sexuality would, in theory, or sometimes borne out, jeopardize the legitimacy of the civil rights movement. They did not talk about the first drag house in Washington, D.C., as I was hoping that they would, but they have talked about a lot of people that I was expecting them to, and also I want to look more into Lorraine Hansberry. I've read A Raisin in the Sun, and I thought it was amazing, and I really want to check out more of her writing and a biography of her, because I think that her life and her writing was so interesting. I've got 3 chapters left, and then the conclusion. I think there's about 89 pages left in this. The weather's been very changeable today, so I might go out and help on the farm, depending on if it rains or not, and then we're planning on playing board games this weekend. I'm really excited to show my roommate's dad Project Hail Mary, because I think he's going to love it, and he hasn't seen it yet. Because of his wife's health, he and his wife don't get out to the movies very often, but he has this enormous TV with like surround sound and everything, so we're gonna rent Project Hail Mary and show it to him, and I'm so excited to watch again and to see his reaction. I'm back home now, as you can see. We had a really nice weekend. I helped with weeding, and we got to play lots of board games, so you'll have seen the footage of me weeding. My body is quite sore still, not used to up and down and, you know, working on my hands and knees weeding. Even like my hands and fingernails hurt from the gloves. But anyway, while I was at my roommate's parents' place, I finished A Black Queer History of the United States. The second half of the book focused more on like movements than people, which is fine, you know, like it's important to talk about movements and not just singling out like the few specific heroes, and talk more about like Black queer people as a collective. And I think also that more women and talk about the work of lesbians and trans people came into this. It also focused more on like, obviously when you're talking about movements, talking about like the goals of movements and policy, and there weren't always things that I agreed with in here, which is like totally fine. I always say I'm open to having my mind changed about things. One thing that did bother me, and I've been complaining about this since I took a queer theory class in college, and I said, why don't the theorists or the authors ever like propose a solution to things? And my theory professor said, yeah, theorists are really good at pointing things out, but not so good at coming up with solutions. And so there's some things in this book where the authors said, you know, a lot of white queer movements have been focused on like policy changes and punitive measures for hate crimes and gay marriage, and how they believe that movement should be more inclusive and focusing on other things, but they didn't actually say what the other things the movement should be focusing on are. Like they say support for Black, queer, and trans people, but they don't say like what they would do. And I would appreciate it a little bit more like proposing solutions, but that is not something that I often get out of theory. So crossing that one off the bingo board. I also finished another book for the bingo that I didn't update you on because I was reading it at the house, but that was, it's in the other room. Summer Official by Rebecca Weatherspoon, a Black romance author that I have read from before. This is the first sapphic book by her that I've read, although she has lots of queer romances. And I'm going to check out her other YA book. So Summer Official was a super cute sapphic romance between two young Black women, and one of them is half Korean, and her mom's name is literally Maureen Gu. And I was like, I see you. I know who that is, which now makes several middle grader YA books that I've read where the author named a character after another YA or middle grade author. I wonder if they all have like a group chat where they discuss this. I have to imagine that they're friends. Next, I think for the suggested by a librarian square, I'm going to listen to the audiobook of Clairboyance. This is a book about a young Native Hawaiian girl, it's middle grade, who gets the power to hear boys' thoughts. I discovered this through a listicle on the library website recommending books by Native Hawaiian authors last month, so that's how it was recommended to me by a librarian. The audiobook is about 6 hours, so I might finish it in the next day or two, and because it's so quick, I might not update you partway through, but I'll let you know my thoughts when I'm. Today I finished the audiobook for Clairboyance by Christina Kahakawila, and it was so cute. I really liked it. I'm rating it 4 stars. So the main character, Clara, lives with her grandmother on Oahu. Her mom and dad are kind of amicably divorced. Her dad lives in Arizona, and over the summer, Clara went to visit him and his girlfriend and really fell in love with Arizona, loved being with her dad, and had a great time. And before the events of this book, she and her best friend Leo, who is like almost a brother to her, kind of had this friend breakup where she was showing her sketchbook of all of these sketches that she'd made over summer break at lunchtime, and Leo basically says like, well, if you like the mainland so much, why don't you go live there? And then from Clara's perspective, it looks like he dumps milk all over her sketchbook. So for the last 3 months, she hasn't really had any friends. Some kids have been teasing her, and she's been pretty quiet and withdrawn, and she wants to move to Arizona with her dad. And as she's being kind of bullied and just ostracized or not talked to by her classmates, she wonders, man, what are boys thinking? And she uses this family artifact, which is a bowl with a lid, and the idea is that when the lid is off, the bowl is listening and you don't want to argue around it. And so the idea is that it is supposed to be this kind of peacekeeping thing, and it helps you to listen to people around you. So Clara asks this bowl, what are boys thinking? And then her, as it turns out, family gift awakens, and everyone in her family can hear different things. So her grandma can hear plants, her, I think, uncle or granduncle could hear fish, and she can hear the thoughts of boys. We see that there's a definite limit to this. She can't hear the thoughts of men or boys that are like teenagers. So it's just the boys her age. And as she has this power and is able to hear the thoughts of her peers, she's trying to fix things based on what she's hearing, but she's, 12 or 13, and so the ways that she tries to fix things often end up backfiring, and she's kind of trying to, force things. But I really liked the empathy and nuance in this book. So many of her peers, I think in fact, every character in this except for one of her teachers are Native Hawaiian, and so the Hawaiian language and pidgin are brought into it. There's multiple conversations about being in a Hawaiian language class, and no one around Clara really hates her, and as she learns from being able to hear boys' thoughts, she had kind of isolated herself, and so was putting off the signals not to talk to her, and so no one talked to her. She also makes a female friend, Pua, who is Native Hawaiian but just moved to Oahu and is being bullied somewhat as someone from the mainland who can never really understand what it's like to be Native Hawaiian. There are several plot lines in the book, and I think it did a good job with being short but juggling these plot lines, but all of the plot lines feeding back into the main theme of being able to listen to people and acknowledging that people are more complicated than you realize they are. Clara has told her dad that she wants to move with him to Arizona. Her grandma, who is raising her, really doesn't want to see her go, but the dad and the grandma are disagreeing on this. And then as Clara starts to listen to people and open up, she's making new friends and new connections. So this was great, and I recommend it for you or a young reader in your life. I haven't updated in a few days. I've been reading other books not for this video, but I'm ready to get back to it. You also might notice that I have a new tattoo. There's glare on the second skin. It's filled up with plasma right now, so it doesn't look very good, but I'll post a picture here of what it looked like right after I got it. It's kind of a shame that after you get your tattoo, you can't really look at it for a few days. I got my tattoo done by Chloe at True Love Tattoo. If you're in Seattle and want a tattoo artist, they're amazing. So much care goes into their work. They love collaborating with the people they're tattooing on the design. Like, they had sent me their sketch and I said, oh, I want the water to be going downwards, and they had some like foam, but I said I just kind of want it to be like falling into space, and I'm really pleased with how that turned out. I had kind of conceived this as I wanted a like portal or window tattoo onto a fantasy landscape, and this they added the spires. That was their idea, and stars and a moon in the sky to kind of convey like a fantastical and a little bit of a sci-fi element. But none of that has to do with my book bingo. I'm actually currently buddy reading As the Earth Dreams with my online friend Erin. Hi Erin, if you're watching. For the Buddy Read Square. Erin and I follow each other on Storygraph, and so we went through each other's Storygraph and decided which book we wanted to read that we were both interested in. And since Erin is Canadian, she wanted to read this one, which is a book of speculative short stories by Black Canadian authors. And it's funny, like, I'll talk in my end of the month wrap up about another book that is contrasting with this one, another book of speculative fiction by Black authors, anthologized by a magazine editor. This is, like, so far, I'm 6 stories in, one of the most solid short story collections I've ever read. I talk a lot about anthologies on here and about how there's always going to be ones that don't work for me, and that, like, the editor has to be strong and they have to, like, at least have, you know, good copy editing. But I have not rated a story below 3 stars, and in fact most of them have been 4 or above. So Therese Mason Pierre, you do a great job anthologizing, and you got some good authors up north. Erin and I are reading a story a day and then talking about them. So this is very good, but I'm not gonna have it done for a few days yet. I was going to read New Sons 2 next, but since I'm currently reading a short story anthology, I didn't want to be reading 2 of those at once. So I'm putting this down, or rather not picking this up for a while. I kind of want to read a book that I didn't tell you about in my initial introduction because it wasn't like something that I wanted to read immediately next, but I do have it on my TBR for this video, and that is Kokun, The Girl from the West by Naoko Uehashi. There's a square on the bingo board that is a country participating in the World Cup. Naoko Uehashi is from Japan. This is a book in translation, translated from the Japanese by Kathy Hirano. and it is a secondary world fantasy about two girls and this magical rice crop. It starts with a map, which is always a good sign. So this is just kind of what I'm feeling in the mood for right now. But I might read these simultaneously, I'm not sure. I do need to read The Small Bodies of Water before it is due back at the library on, I think, Sunday. So I might also start this one. I think I maybe made the mistake of having too many nonfiction nature books on my TBR because I also have, here, The Possibility of Tenderness and An Immense World on my TBR, and I do want to read these, but I'm not in the mood to read that many nature books at once right now, or that many nature books in succession. These are all the books that I'm currently or about to read, and I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed. I also have like other books checked out and books for upcoming videos I need to read, and I just want to like enjoy what I'm reading and not feel pressure. So I might read the first chapters of each of these and decide which one is going to be my next read. Just finished the first chapter of Small Bodies of Water, and I don't think I ever told you much about this book. I found out about this book while looking through winners and runners-up of, I think, the Nan Shepherd Prize. In the UK, there are these two nature writing literary prizes, the Nan Shepherd Prize and the Wainwright Prize. The Nan Shepherd Prize goes to female authors, and actually looking through the Wainwright Prize is how I found out about The Possibility of Tenderness. I was looking out for more nature writing by authors of color. This is a series of like essays or chapters about the author's relationship with water and her family being mixed race of white and Malaysian Chinese descent. The first chapter felt very much like a braided essay where different topics are kind of brought up sort of related to each other, but not really, and you, the reader, kind of sees or creates the similarities between those topics. It talked about her childhood, her relationship with her grandparents, and moving around a lot as a kid, and also getting into her early relationship with water. And now I'm gonna read the first chapter, I think the prologue of Kokun. Okay, the prologue was only 2 pages, but in the spirit of the thing, I've decided to stop there. We got a cast of characters along with the map, and I decided not to look at that. I'll flip back to it if I need to, but I want to try and learn and remember the characters organically. I also find that if I try and read a cast list at the beginning of the book, I get overwhelmed, so I'm trying to avoid that. I know from reading the synopsis that one of the main characters is on the run. She's like the princess of a deposed country, or a conquered country. So in this first chapter, she and her brother are clinging to a cliff, trying to climb it and not fall, while there are potentially men up above on top of the cliff waiting to grab them. So very tense. I like the language. I always wish that I could read a translated work in its original language and be able to compare the original with the translation, but since I don't read Japanese, I have to go through Kathy Hirano's interpretation of it. I tried reading The Beast Player by Naoko Uehashi and didn't get very far into it. It just wasn't grabbing me, and I wasn't really connecting with the writing, but that was also translated by Kathy Hirano. So I don't know, I bought this in the hope that I would like it. I did read the prologue and first chapter a while ago and enjoyed the prose there. Now I have to decide which one of these I'm going to read. Although I am more intrigued by Kokun, I do feel the pressure of this one being due back at the library soon, and I think that I can get through it pretty quickly. Like, it's 250 pages, and then the rest is like a bibliography, and the chapters are pretty short, so I think I'm gonna try and get through this one before it's due back, and then I can concentrate on Kokun. The second skin came off, so you can see the tattoo a little bit better now. I keep getting startled by it out of the corner of my eye. I'm halfway through Small Bodies of Water now. This is just going to be a quick update. The essays have all continued to be braided essays, basically. There will be short paragraphs that kind of follow each other, and it's up to you to find the connecting thread, or it kind of connects two threads or one idea. I particularly like the essays that are talking about media and combining those with Powell's personal experiences or with water or rain. I particularly liked the essay about Mitski, which was contrasted with Powell's own experience as a half Asian, half white woman. And then the essay about rain in Studio Ghibli films. I like both Mitski and Studio Ghibli. I think going into this, I was looking for a bit more of a cohesive narrative, but I also like essay collections, so I'm not that disappointed by it. I wish that some of them had a different format and then they weren't all these kind of like disjointed essays, because, I mean, you can write like a beautiful paragraph, and that's great and admirable, but I want a little bit more, like I said, cohesion in the essays. It's warm out, but not too warm to be outside, so I've been sitting out on our balcony and reading, and I think I'm gonna go back out there and keep reading this book. I might even finish it today. I'm trying to stay off YouTube. The algorithm wants me to keep coming back on there, and so I'm trying to read in like 30-minute chunks, and if I have a thought about something that I want to look up, I just have to save it for later, and then sometimes the thought has passed and there's something that I wanted to look up while reading this book and I can't even remember what it was now, so it must not have been important. It's a few hours later. I've made and eaten dinner, and I've finished Small Bodies of Water by Nina Minya Powell's, and kind of the same thoughts that I had from the first half. She references Jessica J. Lee's Turning, which I've also read. It's about a Chinese-British woman's quest to swim all of the 52 lakes around and in Berlin, and talks about kind of the nature of lakes and the history of like swimming and wild swimming, also a little bit about the area and kind of a few glimpses of her life in there. And both of these books have a bit of a soporific quality to them, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, I just sort of mean that in a neutral way. When I was reading Turning, I kept falling asleep while I was reading it, but I think it was because it was like so soothing. This one did not put me to sleep, but it has a very like quiet cadence to it. There was not as much nature in here as I wanted there to be. It was more memoir than nature, which does end up happening sometimes, I've found. She talks a lot about her family, which I did enjoy reading about. There's an essay in here about her grandfather's work as a scientist that I enjoyed. So it was just fine and nice, and I gave it 3.5 stars. Which means that I'm now going to be starting Kokun, the Girl from the West by Naoko Uehashi. I might not start this right away. I do want to get some writing done tonight since I have a free evening, and I'll let you know my thoughts when I'm further in. Hello, I got a new mic. As you can see, I'm a real YouTuber now. I've got the stand and the light, I've got the microphone. Yeah, we'll see how the audio turns out on this one. I'm halfway through Kokun. It's kind of hard to describe because there are so many concepts and factions involved. Basically, we're following 3 important characters, and then there are lots of like chapters that are 2 men talking in a room, and lots of like backstory and politics. It's a lot more political than I expected. We're in an empire where the most important like concept or crop is this thing called ohale, which is this like wonder rice that has very few natural pests and makes livestock that eat it strong, but
the farmers can't cultivate and sprout the seeds themselves. They have to buy it from the empire, so the empire controls the supply that way. They also control the fertilizer and the recipe for how to make the fertilizer. And there is this kind of ongoing like debate about if the fertilizer is needed, but then maybe the fertilizer is preventing this pest that is a known pest, but it's mutated and now it could be a big problem and cause a famine. So we're following three characters, Aisha, Masyu, and Oli. Oli is this position basically called Kokun, and the like official story is that she's a reincarnated goddess and the reincarnation of the original Kokun who brought Ohale to the empire. And the Kokun's power is extreme scent abilities. In reality, it seems like, and this hasn't been fully explained yet, but it seems like a few people in this world have a kind of latent scent ability, and the Kokun is purposefully selected by the Empire from a protectorate that they want to increase an alliance with or control, and that protectorate or region gets more money if the Kokun is selected from there. So Oli was selected when she was 13, she's now 28, and she has some scent ability, but the kind of character that we were mainly following in part one, Aisha, she is the granddaughter of a deposed king in a protectorate region, and she is like, it seems, the true reincarnation of the Kokun. She has the Kokun's ability to like, oh, I recognize the smell of that person from across the room, even if they were wearing a mask, she would recognize their scent. She can smell plants and their distress, and it is like very sensory overload to her. And several times in the book, she's been able to smell poison either in someone's bloodstream or on food. So Masyu, who is a imperial inspector, finds Aisha and her brother and saves them from execution. Aisha and her brother, being kind of the last heirs of this deposed king, pose a threat to the empire because people who are loyal to their deposed and maybe dead, yes, their dead grandfather, the king, could rally behind them and create a problem for the empire. Now, the king, their grandfather, was deposed because he didn't want to be reliant on the empire for a supply of Ohale, and he told his people that they couldn't use Ohale, which makes sense because the empire is controlling the food supply essentially. But when there was a famine, a bunch of people starved, and so they called for the king's head, and he, or at least his son, was very regretful of this. Masyu, it seems, is potentially loyal to Aisha or the royal family, but he's also wanting her Kokun abilities, and he recognizes that she has this ability that no Kokun since the first one has had abilities this good. And we're just learning that Masyu and Oli, the current Kokun, are in love, but see, this is really complicated. The Kokun is not supposed to ever fall in love with someone, and if she does, they are like quietly disposed of, and sometimes the Kokun is quietly disposed of. Masyu's older brother, who's in a position of power, would find it very convenient to get rid of Masyu for this reason. I think those are all of the threads, basically. I've synthesized it for you, but that's what I've gathered over the course of the book. So it's like fine so far. It's been a little hard to keep track of all of the agricultural and political and magical concepts. And like I said, it is more political than I was expecting, and I was going into this kind of hoping for like a journey or a bit more epic. There's also, and I don't know if this is a translation thing, there's a thing where someone will be talking and then there'll be a paragraph break and it'll like describe the person, like frowning or something, and then it'll like continue with them talking. And it's always a little jarring because I'm expecting when there's a paragraph break, someone else is talking, but it's the same person from the previous paragraph, and that keeps happening. Also, descriptions keep getting repeated. Like, in the course of a few chapters, there were 3 different people who were described as going pale about something multiple times. It was like when they had really shocking news. So far, all of the main characters have not uh, talked to each other very often. It feels like there's a lot of setup and backstory in the first half here. And I want there to be fewer chapters of 2 men talking in a room or a carriage and more chapters of like Ollie or Aisha doing stuff, because it seems like what the focus of the book should be is kind of drifted. It seems like at this point that Aisha and Oli are going to a remote location, this lodge that one of the noble families own, and they're going to have more contact there, which I think would be nice. Not that much has actually like happened in the plot so far, and so I want to see like events start unrolling based on all of this setup. I finished Kokun, I think 2 days ago, but then yesterday was Ren Fair. I came home after Ren Fair and immediately zonked out and went to sleep, and then I had D&D, so I haven't had the chance to update you. I continued to have the same kind of critiques of the second half of the book as the first, and ultimately I gave it 2.75 stars. Some things happened, and then in part 3, which was about 4 chapters, all of a sudden there was a big time skip, and there were new characters introduced and new places, and I felt like it could have been the first story could have been wrapped up and then had this start in the next volume, but that might just be more of a convention I'm unfamiliar with in Japanese literature. I really wasn't following a lot of the like politics and agriculture and things being uncovered, and like I know that I can follow complicated political stuff, but because I kind of didn't care about the characters and it was so complicated and it was talking about like things we weren't seeing but that had happened in the past and were relevant to now, it just felt like most of the book was talking about the past and not things actually happening. While it had strong female main characters in Oli and Aisha, they were kind of the only female characters, and I would have liked to see more. Masu, the other important character, was just kind of he was like good at everything and really like smart and handsome. It's just kind of like, okay. So I won't be continuing in this series, unfortunately, but it's good to read more translated stuff. That's one of my reading goals for this year. And I have another book by this author, the first volume of a series called Moribito, on my TBR, and so I still will be reading that one. The main character is a female samurai, I think, and I think it's going to be a little bit more action packed than this one, which is just what I'm looking for. Between this and then an audiobook that I was listening to that I wasn't enjoying very much, I didn't feel like I was going to be in a slump, but I was like, I gotta read something that I know I'm gonna like right now. And so I started a historical romance book. But after I finish that one, I'll be starting New Sons 2. I already introduced this one, so it's a sci-fi fantasy anthology by BIPOC authors. Niveau has a story in this, and I know most of the contributors, so I'm hoping that it will be high quality. I've been reading a lot of short story collections this month, and so I don't want to get burned out on them, which is why I wanted to take a break between this book and this one. I also decided to push out the release of this video by a week because I was feeling a bit of a time squeeze, and so now I am not under as much pressure. I can read more books for this video and then also have time to read other books in between. I've been reading a lot of contemporary stuff lately, and I'm just missing fantasy and sci-fi and things with action and exciting climaxes. And I love lots of contemporary stuff, but I need to get back to fantasy right now. It is far too hot to film in my room right now, and the AC is going, which you can probably hear, but I am not turning that off. I've read 9 stories of New Suns 2, and on average, I would say that the star rating is probably going to work out to be about like the average rating that I give short story anthologies. Also, that there's been no glaring editorial errors or weird grammatical or spelling errors. Nisi Shaw knows what they're doing, and so do the rest of these authors. We do have a story by Nevo, one of my favorite authors in here, and it is one of my favorites from the collection. I've read several short story anthologies this month, chatting with my buddy Aaron when we were reading As the Earth Dreams about something that I've coined the term for a wait, what story, where when you get to the end of it, you go, wait, what? And that will cause me to rate a story poorly, not because it was poorly written necessarily, but because I didn't understand what was going on the whole time, the premise was kind of obfuscated, or we got to the end and there didn't seem to be a point to it, or the theme got dropped halfway through. That's a wait, what story. There have been a few of those in here. So far the one that I've read is The Lowest by Alex Jennings. Goodnight Gracie has been a bit of a wait, what story, which I rated 2.5 stars. I really liked The Farmer's Wife and the Fairy Queen by K. Tempest Bradford, which was a bit of a sequel to Tamlin. And as I mentioned, the Nevo story, there was a Tananarive Dew story that I liked. It says on the back, and this is not mentioned in Walter Mosley's introduction, that binaries and twos, dualities, halves, and alternates are in this. Like, I'll give you alternates, but I don't think that's a binary. There's, like, quantum physics, there's infinite alternates. There's been a mix of sci-fi and fantasy, lots of, like, broad out there concepts, I would say, and even stories that I rated poorly, I can give credit to having a out there concept that takes the reader a while to understand as they're going. I think it is very bold to do that in a short story when by the time the reader's cottoned on to what's happening, the story is over. And some people like that. I can if there's good character work. But like I said, it's hard to execute in a short story. There was a short story by Darcy Little Badger, and I've said before, maybe in the Mermaid vlog, that I like Little Badger's short fiction more than her novels, but this one, Juan, was my least favorite short story by them, I think. I think they might have a story in New Suns as well that I didn't care for very much, but their story in Mermaids Never Drown was like my favorite one in the book. But like not everyone's story could be a 5-star for me. Like even Nevo's story in here I only rated a 4. There are fewer authors that I know in the second half, so Hiromi Goto and Jamie Go, I think were both in the Sea is Ours anthology, which is a Southeast Asian steampunk anthology that I liked, and I think it's kind of hard to get a hold of. But Malka Older, who I've read from before, who did the Plady and Masa series, has a story here. I'll be curious to see what her short fiction is like. Since there aren't a lot of, like, comprehensive themes, this is a short story collection, that's kind of all I have to say now. I think sometimes, and certainly with the first New Suns, a collection can kind of be stacked with the best stories in the first half, like the A-sides and B-sides of an album, and I think, like, I rated several stories 4 stars in the first half, so I'll be curious to see what the quality of the stories, or rather, what my personal rating of the stories is like in the second half. Last night I finished New Suns 2, averaging out the rating that I gave to each story. This was a 3.25, which I think is pretty standard for anthologies, which is kind of what I expected to give it. There was a 4-star story in the second half, Counting Her Petals by Christopher Caldwell, but that was the only 4-star story. We did not get higher than a 4-star in this book. There's a good run of like 3.5-star averages. I thought that Before the Glory of Their Majesties by Min-Soo Kang was interesting. It was like I wasn't sure if there was a gimmick at first, but it was half fiction, half nonfiction, thinking about disabilities and tropes about disabled people in stories contrasted with kind of a fairy tale. The last story by Jamie Go was only 7 pages, and I thought it was not very good. Even after my rating, I wrote 2 stars, and then I quoted what I said when I finished reading the story, which was, "What? Come on." I was thinking about anthologies centered on the identity of the author versus anthologies that are gathered like about a certain theme or story type. I love Silk and Steel, which is a lesbian speculative fiction anthology about pairings wherein there's a sword lesbian and a diplomacy lesbian. I like fairy tale retelling anthologies. I think having an anthology with a specific theme makes it a little bit easier to rate, where you talk about how well each author conveyed the theme or story type and can compare them with each other, where here it's just, I mean, it's anthologized and you can think about why each of these stories were written for this anthology, but your brain has to kind of come up with the similarities, and otherwise you're just analyzing each story kind of singularly. I don't regret reading it, but I am so done with short stories right now. I really want to read a long book with its following one character. I've been reading a lot of like short story collections, essay collections. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. I just started an arc for a fantasy book. It is unrelated to this. But for the last book that I'm reading for this video, this got a little bit away from me. I'll be reading The Possibility of Tenderness by Jason Allen Passant. My French is abysmal, but I assume that's how you pronounce this name. This is by a Jamaican author who has lived in both Jamaica and England, and I think it's about the nature in both England and Jamaica and how those two are related to each other, kind of comparing and contrasting. Blurb by Robert McFarlane. That guy, I think anyone that asks him to blurb their nature book, he will. So I'll start reading this soon. I'm going away for the weekend to my roommate's parents' place, so I might read this there. This video needs to go up in about 9 days, and most of the editing is done, so I just gotta finish this, and then the video will be ready to go up. Alright, I'm halfway through The Possibility of Tenderness, and this is living up to the prompt. It's very soothing. It is a memoir, but also getting into a lot of the nature of Jamaica, and in particular this very like rural peasant area of Jamaica. So the author grew up in a little hamlet called Coffee Grove with his maternal grandmother for the first few years of his life while his mother was getting a teaching degree at school, and then he lived with her in a small town, which was itself very metropolitan feeling to someone who grew up in such a rural area. He talks a lot about the relationship between people, particularly his people, and land. And at the section that I just finished reading, he is trying to research into the colonial history of the area and the white colonists and slave owners that owned the Coffee Grove plantation. And he kind of speculates, I think kind of the natural question is how many of the people that I grew up with are descended from slaves or the slave owner? Am I? Not me. There are several like characters in the people that he's living with and the people that he's seeing from day to day as he's temporarily living back in the area writing this book. There's a man who is a local Rastafarian and kind of medicine herb worker who is teaching him a lot about local plants that Alan Passant vaguely remembers from growing up and has lost a lot of the knowledge having moved to England and then Paris. And as I'm looking for in nature writing, it's never just one thing. You can't talk about nature or a memoir or history without talking about all these other things, your own relationship to it, history of colonialism on Jamaica, and the history of land clearances in Scotland and England and how that trickled down to the colonies. This is a subject that I know a marginal amount about. I've read some stuff about the history of like England land rights and right to roam, and he talks about that a little bit here. The sense of place is very evocative, and if there's ever any dialogue, it's written in italics and is in Jamaican patois, so it is a little bit difficult for me to understand. I'm adjusting to it and learning the words. It's been a quick read so far, but I don't want to rush through it. I want to kind of like sit with it. I think his writing is very beautiful, and he has a lot of really great insights about the things that he's writing about. I finished The Possibility of Tenderness, and I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. It was perfectly nice. This isn't the book's fault, but I paused reading a fantasy book that is one of my favorite books of the year so far to read this in time to get this video out. And so my mind was kind of elsewhere while I was reading it, which I think may have colored how I was feeling about it and kind of the reading experience. So there were times in the prose where my mind was wandering a little bit, and I think that was partly due to me and partly due to kind of the sentence structure. This is a very meditative, contemplative book. It is thinking a lot about thinking, like the way that we think about ourselves in relation to the land, in relation to plants. The sections that I liked the most were the ones that were the most grounded in like a setting or people that he was reminiscing on or talking to, and I wasn't as into the more philosophical parts of it, although I think they were very worthwhile, and it's very well written. He's returning to this place where he grew up and seeing kind of the ghost of his grandmother and revisiting things that he saw when he was a lot smaller and how different they look. He goes to the post office that his grandmother worked at, that they went to every day, and just how small it looks to him, and his grandmother's house he feels so large in. I feel like the book could have been a little bit more focused. We're tackling family, Jamaican history, plants, the author's relationship with this small settlement. And I've read other books of nonfiction or nature writing where those things come together a bit more seamlessly, and I could kind of see the edges here where I don't think that topics were necessarily fully well integrated. But this is his first work of nonfiction. He's written some books of poetry before this, and there is some poetry interspersed in here. It wasn't necessarily to my taste, but I appreciate kind of like in a musical when a character sings when they can no longer speak. It felt like he was putting into poetry what he couldn't put into prose. So that's The Possibility of Tenderness, and that is going to complete this video. It went on for way longer than I expected it to. I started working on this a month ago, and I really gotta stop doing that. I gotta have more, like, compact videos. What with this book and other books that I've been reading outside of this video, if you can believe it, that I've been reading other things that weren't also in this video, I'm only like 3 books away from completing my bingo board. I've got lots of reading challenges right now, and I'm ahead on a lot of them, and I think that what I'm trying to do is like finish my homework, so to speak, so I can go read other things, because the books in these challenges are books that I am interested in, but as soon as I like assign them to myself, I feel like I immediately want to read something else. And maybe there's a lesson to be learned in that. But thank you to Seattle Public Library, King County Library System, and Seattle Arts and Lectures for facilitating another summer book bingo. A very happy August to all of you. I hope your summers are going well. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next week.